Yeah, Mr. Fortune, it's nice to have you here.
Yeah, good to have you too. Yeah, I'm
The late
glad.
comrade,
I greet you.
one of the most prominent men in Ab Sudan.
Yeah, it's such a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you so much.
I'm excited.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. For those watching us, this is Talk to Fortunes, where we talk about Africa. Africa is the centerpiece of our conversation, and it is born out of the fact that there has been a lot of negative narratives about Africa, and those negative narratives has defined and the way people and the rest of the world sees the African continent. And so to get these facts right, the African story must be told by Africans themselves. And so it is time to begin to question, a lot that has been said about this continent, and then begin to, as Africans and as those who have the information about our roots, our origin, our continent, begin to tell the stories about who we are and not stories as told by others. So on this show today, I have with me, an African, a Nigerian, is true and true an Igbo man. Don't mind his accent. He's still an African and a Nigerian, and you are going to find out as this conversation goes on. So please, can you introduce yourself, please?
My name is Tochukwu Odebene, or Raf Ernest Odebene. I go by the two names. I'm a Nigerian by birth, and I grew up in Nigeria. I had most of my childhood experience, not even in the city, in the village.
Wow.
Wow. I had my primary and secondary school in Mbise, and after which I went to the university in Abia State University, and I studied economics. After I graduated in ABSU, I worked briefly with UBA, United Bank for Africa, before I proceeded to Canada for my master's. After my master's in Canada, I decided to relocate to America, where I currently live. Having traveled around and lived in so many countries, I have come to ask myself, what is the difference? Where did we get it wrong in Nigeria?
Wow.
As a core Nigerian who have seen the two or three sides of Nigeria, the upper class, middle class, and the lower class, I begin to ask myself, what is the problem? Where did we get it wrong? What do we do differently that the Westerners do differently? One thing I have come to understand is our biggest problem as Nigerians is psychological.
We need to take it one by one, Mr. Otomene Tochi. Now, you just mentioned a very important point, that our biggest problem is psychological.
Psychological.
Okay, so now I want us to take it one by one, because I'm sure you have some points you marshal out as this conversation proceeds. So when you talk about psychological, what are you referring to, please?
You see, let me just bring it down. You see, when you ask an average Nigerian, what's your problem? What do you think about this country? They tend to talk about economy, infrastructure, and all those things. I feel like those things are the effects of our psychological defect.
Effect of our psychological defects.
Let me tell you. Let me give you two examples. We have a current president, President Muhammadu Buhari. Before Buhari came into power, it is obvious to every Nigerian that President Buhari came in with an underlying illness, a medical condition.
Very, very true.
Obviously. His first term in office, he spent most of his time on medical tourism, which I'm not against. Every man will really run around to save his life. But personally, I would think that a man in that capacity and position should have at least tried to build a hospital that will take care of him now and when he leaves office, within his environment, within his country. But this is not the case. Instead, there is a psychological defect which makes them feel like if it is in Nigeria, is inferior. If it is abroad, is superior. You know,
wow.
it's just.
Can I cut you now? And because one of the high points of this conversation is that our listeners should be able to understand, exactly the message that we're trying to pass across. Now, you just hit on something that is very, very, very central to why this country is not developing. Anything African, because this program is about Africa, even though we are narrowing it down to Nigeria. So I will use the word that everything African is probably seen as inferior.
Yeah. I mean, I understand. I mean, I feel like African problem is very similar. You know, the same problem we have in Nigeria is similar to Ghana and many other surrounding African countries. But I'm really trying to narrow it down to a place where I'm familiar with. Because when I talk about Africa as a continent, it might be a little bit too big to pick up points.
True.
Now, President Buhari, don't be surprised. President Buhari's doctor in London might still be a Nigerian. But there is that confidence that if he is in America, if he is in London, then it's better.
Wow.
Now, let's look at another example.
Okay.
Bola Ahmed Tinubu was just declared the president, which is okay. The next thing he did was to fly out of the country, go to France to rest, and now make a picture of himself in France and post it on social media as if France is nearby heaven. I would have had more respect for him if Senator Bola Ahmed Tinubu had traveled to Calabar and rest, traveled to Bayelsa and rest. I have never